Welcome on in to episode 120 of the Dynamic Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Colin, and today we are talking about the podcast pivot as we are making a pretty significant change to the podcast format beginning next week. For those of you who regularly listen, you already know this, but if you are new to the pod or anything related to the Talent 409 Leadership Academy, my word of the year for 2020 is efficiency. I chose this word because when 2020 began, I knew I was going to be a new father in July. Because of that, I wanted to find a more efficient way to work so I could spend more time with my new family. It also just made sense and seemed like a smart business decision to focus on now and in the future. When it comes to efficiency with this podcast, I tried a new process at the beginning of this year. I decided to batch episodes for the first time. This was great because it meant I had, in most cases, conversations recorded at least 3 months in advance of their release date. All I needed to do was edit the episode on my own time. Batching worked so well that by the time late April/early May rolled around, I had all of my planned conversations for 2020 already completed. So I was already finding one way to be more efficient as I now worried less on the future of the podcast because I had the content and I had a calendar all mapped out. Overall, learning to batch was a win, but I started to feel some friction building with my process. For example, some episodes were recorded so far out that I largely forgot the scope of the conversation or major items of conversation had drastically changed. This wasn't a good feeling because although my podcast episodes tend to be more evergreen than not, it felt like to me that I was missing out on key moments with my guests. Then the pandemic rolled around. All of a sudden, everyone, and I truly mean it seemed like everyone, was starting their own podcast. In late June or early July, I saw a number that estimated 325,000 or more new podcasts were started during the pandemic in America alone. Talk about noise. I'm already an indie podcaster, and now my content was being drowned out by folks that would produce maybe 1 to 3 new episodes before quitting. Yes, my podcast was going to survive, but it got harder to be heard, and that reflected in my numbers from March to June of 2020. Finally, there was the last straw. The evergreen format of my guest conversations are phenomenal. Listeners can learn from these folks today or 2 years from now, and I love that. However, the week-to-week format was starting to put a strain on my flexibility and timeliness. 2020 has thrown a whole lot at us, but one of the biggest things it did was force me to think about my schedule in the way I put content out. For example, when the anti-racism movement really picked up, I felt handcuffed in my ability to have an episode where I could either talk about it or bring on a subject matter to talk about it. I felt the same way at the beginning of the pandemic. And then I thought to myself, Colin, this won't be the last time a major newsworthy topic comes about. There were ample opportunities to talk about the pandemic and the anti-racism movement in regards to leadership, for example, yet I was only able to scratch the surface with both to this point. That needed to change. I needed more flexibility because I needed the opportunity to be timely when I could be. Out of all of this, a new podcast content schedule has been born. One that I truly believe is going to be more enjoyable for my guests, for you, and certainly for me as the host as well. So, what are we talking about here? What can you expect with the new format of the Dynamic Leaders Podcast? Well, first, don't expect much change in terms of the conversations. The topic matter for these talks was always on point, and with a few subtle changes here and there, I feel as if we are in an excellent spot from a content perspective. The biggest change you'll notice is in the release of episodes. Beginning on October 5th, I am moving toward a 1 per quarter release schedule. It'll be Netflix style. So, for example, on Monday, October 5th, you will see 8 episodes appear in your downloads. All 8 at one time for you. No more waiting, no more week to week. You get a chunk of episodes at once, what I'm calling quote-unquote pod series episodes, and you'll get to listen to them at your convenience. Maybe you'll binge them that first day or first week. Maybe you'll spread them out over the course of the next several weeks. However you decide to listen is completely on you. Not only does this schedule format give me added flexibility, it gives you, my listeners, added flexibility too. Win-win. Okay, Colin, how does this give you added flexibility? Well, it's pretty simple. Since each quarter episodes will be released in the Netflix style, there is an open calendar of sorts for a 3-month period. You may hear episodes like Behind the Seas with my wife Christine, but you may also get an opportunity to hear from someone who is a subject matter expert on a particular timely topic. For example, we have a pretty major general election approaching in November. Maybe in late October, you will find yourself listening to a politics expert. That's just one example. In short, on the flexibility, I never again want to be in a situation where something like the anti-racism movement comes about and I don't get an opportunity to truly address it until 2 months after the fact. That's just sad, and it's poor work on my end. I can do better, and I believe this format will be better. For my guests, I'm also envisioning them enjoying this format more, because their episodes will get repeated attention during a 3-month window. Instead of the one and done promos each week, I now will have the opportunity to promote each pod series as often as I feel is necessary. For this first iteration, we've already created more promo items to show you on social media, and who knows where that's going to go from a content sharing perspective in the future. But I know as someone who has been a guest on other podcasts that it stinks when you only get showcased once for your time. Sometimes folks don't even get promoted. If a guest is giving me their time to be on the show, share their story and guidance, then I want to make sure that people hear, and I want the guests to know how much we appreciate the time they gave to do the show. It's the right thing to do. And in a world with so much noise, this will hopefully allow us to rise to the top more often. There are a few other insider details for guests in this new format that I won't get into in detail on this podcast. So there you have it. This is the pivot we are taking, and this is the future of the podcast. I am so excited about this change to the podcast, and while it will be different, I hope you will find it enjoyable and continue to listen. I truly feel the conversations we have on this podcast can help anyone who aspires to be better. That concept and what we strive for will never change. But what hopefully is changing is a more exciting and engaging method that works for everyone, from me to you to our incredible guests. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this solo pod episode on our upcoming podcast Pivot. Remember, if you ever have any suggestions or feedback on how to improve this podcast, you can take the listener survey located in the show notes, or you can shoot me an email, which you can also find in the show notes. We are back on Monday with the first pod series, which will entail of 8 total episodes of conversations with teachers, Olympians, coaches, and incredible leaders. I'm so excited, and I can't wait for you to all listen. So please stay tuned for all of that and all of the fun we are about to embark on. And until next time, take it easy.